All right. So, good day, everyone. This is Ms. Torres, and welcome to our lesson on queer theory and the Yogyakarta principles. I will share my screen. All right. So, if I may share, class, no, as I was preparing for this lesson, I actually felt a little disturbed in terms of the amount of injustices I have discovered in relation to how the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community in the Philippines and also in other countries have been treated. No? The injustices that the LGBT community have experienced in terms of their security, their right to express themselves, their right to be recognized by law, and even their right to create a family have all been trampled in throughout the course of history, or even in current society today. The rights of the LGBT have been disrespected or un, un have been um, have been ignored entirely. But I hope that this lesson will be informative as well as enriching for everyone, no? Um, because it has also been enriching for me, actually, class, as I was preparing for this lesson, no, or for this lecture. It's been enriching for me because as a woman, as a young woman, I have also learned a lot in terms of the fact that, oh, it's not actually true that these strict beliefs that Christianity or Islam have instituted, no, these strict beliefs about sexuality are the only truths that exist in the world. Because as I was researching and preparing for this lecture, I learned as well, not personally, that there are actually other ways of navigating through sexuality, and it is not just um, heterosexuality. No, I have learned a lot about homosexuality as well. I personally, my sexual orientation, I am heterosexual now. I am attracted to men, and personally, I would want to put myself in the shoes of gay people as I present this lecture, and I hope that for my students, no, in this section who are gay, who are openly vocal about their rights, or for people who are not as familiar with this lesson yet, I hope that we will be able to create a substantial discussion on the topic. So we're not going to make this too intellectual. We want to have this conversation or this lesson in a conversational way, not exactly too technical, no, because actually the lessons are already, or this lesson is already a little too technical in terms of the information that will be presented to everyone. But I don't want it to seem too rigid. We want to just take this lesson in a way that we're just trying to have a conversation about queer theory and the Yogyakarta principles. Now, for the benefit of everyone who might in the class, now for the benefit of everyone in the class who might be curious, or who might have not heard about the Yogyakarta principles, the Yogyakarta principles is a framework. It's an international human rights framework, no, that was signed in 2006 during a meeting in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, um, in order to institutionalize or create a body of international law that deals with gender and sexual orientation issues, especially on the right to non-discrimination. So that is the Yogyakarta principles. Without further ado, class, let's begin. Now, our lesson objectives for this lesson. Firstly, we want, or at the end of the discussion, You should be able to discuss what queer theory is, identify significant persons who were able to include queer theory as among the important elements in discussing gender and gender issues, know what the Yogyakarta principles are, and understand a person's freedom and rights in terms of their gender expression and identity. Now, our assessment for this lesson will be on April 6 for Gender and Society, section MLS 2E. And for the other sections, it will be during our synchronous class, not during the week. So let's begin. Now, I would like you all, no, everyone, I would like everyone to answer the Google form that I have posted in the classroom. So in the classroom, just answer the following questions, Kasna, because I just want to have a temperature check, just to see what your actual beliefs are or your viewpoints are in relation to the LGBT and homosexuality, since these are sensitive topics, and I want to angle this lesson in a way that would be sensitive towards your backgrounds as well. Now, the questions are: what do you think about the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community? What's your general opinion about the LGBT? Give your honest opinion. And then the second question is: do you think that, especially for gay students, do you think that it can always be one's identity to have been born gay? Do you think that a person can always have been gay from the start, now, ever since they were a child? Do you think that that can happen? Of course. And do you think that one's true self can be homosexual? That for example, if I were homosexual now, do you think that my true self is loving girls? Do you think that that can happen to a person? And moreover, do you think that loving a person of your same sex, not girls loving girls and boys loving boys, is the same as loving someone of the opposite sex, girl-boy relationships? Do you think that a homosexual relationship is just the same as a heterosexual relationship? No, the level of love that a person can give to the person they love is the same as how a guy and a girl would love each other. You think that a girl and a girl relationship or a boy to boy and boy relationship has the same amount of love, no, as a girl boy relationship? Or do you believe that homosexual relationships makes you uncomfortable, and that men and women should keep the male-female standard of love intact because of your religious beliefs, perhaps, no, Christianity, Islam, or etc.? And do you think that homosexuality is inherently sinful? So kindly just answer the form, class. Now I'm going to suppose that you have already answered the form already. And I will just make a general assumption, maybe, class, of the possible answers that students may give now, since I am recording this lecture here right now. So we'll assume that there may be more open attitudes about the LGBT among students now in this section. But I will also assume that there are also some students who might be more conservative about the topic on homosexuality, because I do understand that there are some students here who are from more specific sectors of Christianity, no? Or rather other denominations of Christianity. And I also understand that there are some Muslim students as well in this section. So regardless, class, of our beliefs, I would like to request your open-mindedness now as we discuss the topics in this lesson. And although it sounds like we're going to talk about something dangerous, but no, we're not going to talk about anything dangerous. But maybe at the latter part, I might show some media now that might be a little sensitive in relation to the violence that can happen to, or that has happened to, the LGBT community. So I just would like to request your not understanding, but more on your open-mindedness. And I know that you're capable of that. So let's start, class. Now, I would like you all to get your textbooks and kindly go to page 68. That is lesson 4, queer theory. And we will also discuss about the Yogyakarta principles, which is found on page 70 of our textbook, no, Gender and Society by Duman Lagetao. Right. So basing from our textbook, we know, or we can see here in page 68 that there is a notion that gender is binary. Now, I would like you to keep in mind, class, the word binary now, because it's a little it's a bit of a vague topic, but please take note that binary means two, no? So the probability of categorizing a certain gender, for example, in only two ways. So when we say gender is binary, we mean that gender is only categorized into two categories, namely heterosexual and homosexual. Um, or rather, no, gender is binary. There are only two genders, rather, class, no, that is male and female. All right, sorry. So gender is binary, meaning that there are only two possible genders, no, or maybe we can apply it to both class, no, homosexuality and heterosexuality, and then male and female. All right. So the notion that gender is only categorized into two is not a universal view, actually. So not all peoples, not all, we're not even talking about just Earth, nor like, when we say universal, it applies to maybe the whole body of the universe, that includes not just here but also in other places. But generally, what we were saying here is that the understanding that, of course, that the understanding that um, that a man and a woman is the only acceptable arrangement in the world, no, that is not universal. That means that not everybody in the world believes that gender is binary, that there are only two genders, no, because for example, in the Philippines, class, no, prior to Spanish colonization, before the Spaniards arrived in the country in the 1520s, 500 years ago, the Babaylan of the Visayas and the Catalonan of the Tagalog regions were either women or men who prefer to take on this feminine role. So let's watch a video class on pre-colonial women, class, now, because we want to have a grounding on what really were the beliefs of gender in among our ancestors, now, among the Filipino ancestors, because I think Filipino identity can really be rooted in the pre-colonial times, because as you will learn in this video class, you will understand that, oh, the reason why, oh, there are some remnants of our ancestors that are still prevalent today, no, but maybe we can look at or we can focus more, just to make the point, no, there are some remnants of our ancestors that are still prevalent today. For example, our views on our culture of, I guess a relevant example would be our culture of having strong women, because I think that Filipino culture, in essence, there are many strong women in the Philippines. Na, I can cite my mother, for example, or maybe in your families, na, you might have a strong mother figure. And I believe that as you will look at this video, you will start to understand that, oh, it it was evident in our, before the Spaniards arrived in the Philippines, that there has always been a level of strength a level of strength in the Filipino woman. So we want to base our identities, and for the LGBT, for example, we can also start off and discuss later on about the idea of the two spirit gender, no, or the third gender. More about the third gender and the two spirit gender of the Native American culture later on. So let's look at this lecture from the magisterial lectures by Ateneo de Manila. Actually, this is from Ateneo de Manila, this video.
In the study of Philippine history, one area where there seems to be a dearth of knowledge is the pre-Hispanic era. One question that always comes up is what was life like for women in the pre-Hispanic Philippines? Today, I will share a little of my research on the topic. So where do we start looking for the pre-Hispanic Filipino woman? In my research, I found that a good source to do this would be the epics, since they present the ostensibly pure Filipino culture. The idea of purity is problematic in itself, but the exercise of looking at the epics shows us a baseline from which to compare. A brief look at some pre-Hispanic epics such as the Hudhud of the Ifugao, the Ilocano Biag ni Lamang, and the Panay Labaw Donggon, the Manobo Agyu, show that women were prominent characters with roles which reflect the egalitarian societies of the pre-Hispanic era and the Austronesian tradition. Epics and other forms of oral tradition reflected the realities and aspirations of these early communities. In many of these, women were spiritual specialists, healers with knowledge of ancient medicinal and plant lore, keepers of history through various means such as chants and oral history, also in weaving and craftsmanship. They were also in positions of leadership, not only in their families and kinship groups, but also in their communities. We can also use many other sources to find the Filipina in the pre-Hispanic era. Some of these would be artifacts, relics, material culture, and we can interpolate from the lives of indigenous peoples and cultural communities today. We can also use oral tradition and folklore. Today, though, we will focus on an unlikely source, the documents written by Spanish civil and religious officials in the early days of colonization. And these are some of them. So we have some documents written by civil officials like Miguel de Loarca and Antonio de Morga. And we also have documents written by clerical officials like Juan de Plasencia, Pedro Chirino, Francisco Alsina. Many of the early chroniclers were civil officials and members of the clergy, and they documented the chroniclers' perceptions and observation of women and their roles in early period societies. These show us how the colonizers perceived and tried to make sense of these practices and how they might change them to conform more closely to the Spanish ideal or present them in such a way as to justify the conversion and colonization of the early societies. So what do these Spanish sources tell us about women in the Philippines? One of the first things that would be noticed would be the physical appearance of women. Physical attributes such as skin color, long black hair were noted. In general, the chroniclers did not note any differences between women and men since they both sported long hair, tattoos, and wore similar clothes and adornments. On the slide, you can see that women wore small jackets with sleeves of the same kind of cloth of all colors called baro. The principal women wore crimson ones, some of silk, which indicates trade. They wore many gold necklaces about the neck, large earrings of wrought gold in the ears, rings, gold of precious stones. Women's attire was usually made up of abbreviated skirts, filmy fabrics, and accessories of various materials, all of which became subject to moralizing since these were perceived as scanty, flimsy, inadequate coverage. Apart from the physical attributes, the chroniclers commented on the demeanor of women who moved around freely, conversed with men, worked alongside them, engaged in commerce, danced, and sang with abandon. Many of them even carried daggers at their sides. They also noted the economic roles. Early Philippine societies were marked by abundant resources and scarce labor. As is the case in environments such as this, women played important economic roles and many had economic autonomy. Both men and women worked on rice fields and other agricultural endeavors as fisherfolk, traders, and slaves. One of the domains which could be seen as exclusive to women was the weaving of cloth and needlework, products which were valuable and the skill that was esteemed. Today, all over the country, there is a strong weaving tradition, often with distinct regional or communal features. Women were also spiritual and religious specialists or babaylanes and catalonans. Although these roles are not exclusively for women, women in these roles caught the particular attention of the Spanish chroniclers because this was rare in their own societies. As spiritual specialists, they were interpreters of signs, making them important decision makers in societies in which economic and political choices were often dictated by spiritual or religious signs. For example, in Cordillera societies, the decision to go to war had to be confirmed by a babaylan through a ritual. The egalitarian nature of pre-Hispanic society was also reflected in social roles of women. This can be seen in the extensive observation and criticism directed at such social institutions as betrothal and marriage. The practice of the dowry in the pre-Hispanic Philippines was the direct opposite of that in the Western world, where the dowry was property the bride brought into her marriage to be enjoyed by her husband. Here, it was given by the groom to the woman's parents. And many early chroniclers interpreted this as a depraved practice of purchasing a woman. But a closer look at their own chronicles will reveal that this was not the case at all. The size and value of the dowry was in direct relation to a woman's social status and class, as well as her own individual worth as a weaver, a healer, a merchant, or even a slave. It was a gift for the bride's family and part of the inheritance of any future children. It was also there in case of the dissolution of the marriage, where it would be redistributed according to customary law. The gift was shared within the woman's kin group, and property brought into the marriage remained with the individuals. Anything acquired after the marriage belonged to both equally. What exactly constituted the dowry? In general, it was made up of movable property like gold, jewelry, heirloom jars and plates, and most importantly, slaves. Women could have their own slaves, and Maginoo women could enslave people on their own authority without having to rely on a father, a husband, or a son to do so. Miguel de Loarca described marriage practices and differentiated them according to social class. An old woman unites the hands of the pair over a bowl of rice, throws the rice over the wedding guest, and declares the marriage is completed. The marriage feast then commences, and the feasting was regarded with distaste by the friar observers, noting that it was, and I quote, made up of racket, reveling, of dancing and singing until they fall asleep with fatigue and repletion, all helter-skelter without any distinction. The clergy decried the participation of the traditional spiritual specialists like the Kotalonan and the Babaylan, and the rites that they officiated over, such as the sacrifice of pigs accompanied with dancing, singing, and incantations. But more than the wedding ceremonies, which were seen as depraved and unseemly, the roles of husband and wife were often the subject of criticism by early chroniclers. In particular, the physical, financial, and personal autonomy of women was at odds with Spanish norms. Wives had a great deal of physical mobility, being free to visit relatives, to travel. They could enter into contracts and financial transactions on their own, and they had forms of redress in case the marriage ended. From Loarca, the women are beautiful but unchaste and do not hesitate to commit adultery because they receive no punishment for it. One of the biggest shocks for the early chroniclers was the laxity of rules on celibacy and chastity within marriage. Spanish clergy and authorities were surprised at the cavalier attitude of the Filipinos towards sexual relations and marriage, as well as the ease with which they divorced and remarried. Pedro Chirino S.J. commented wryly, "The marriage lasted no longer than the peace between them. They are divorced on the slightest occasion." From Loarca, "If the man through dissolute conduct fail to support the wife, she shall leave him and not be obliged to return anything of the dowry that he has given her, and she shall have freedom and permission to marry another man." Antonio de Morga added, "These marriages were annulled and dissolved for slight cause, and the dissolution of properties was mediated by old men and village elders." This occurred commonly enough that there were already customary practices on the division of the dowry. inheritance, and social status of the children, depending on the circumstances of the divorce. So what did the 16th and 17th century Spanish chroniclers find out about the pre-Hispanic Filipino women? They found women who had relative mobility and agency. They were surprised to see women traders who rowed out to the boats by themselves, women agents who mediated contracts of betrothal and marriage, Babaylan and Catalonan who were the spiritual leaders in their respective societies, essentially looming as the fiercest competitors of the Spanish clergy. Most shocking to the friars was the relative sexual freedom enjoyed by women and the lax rules on marriage. The women they encountered in the Philippines were vastly different from those in their own societies. This was evident in their physical appearance and demeanor, their active roles in society and economic life, as well as their treatment in the institution of marriage and betrothal. In all of these, the egalitarian nature of early Philippine societies was evident. So why is it important for us to look for the pre-Hispanic Filipino woman today? For centuries now, various forces have sought to recreate the Filipino woman, initially as the devout, prayerful Catholic ideal, the Maria Clara of the 1800s, the good little brown sister of the American period. And looking at the pre-Hispanic Filipino woman will show us the continuities, changes, responses, and transformations, not only for women, but for Philippine society in general. This year, the world will commemorate the 500th year of the Magellan expedition, which brought the Philippines into the gaze of the Spanish colonial empire. Today, this gaze must include the strong, industrious, and independent women of the early Philippines.
Okay, class. So that was the video on the pre-colonial Filipina. No? Although it's not exactly related to queer theory, but I believe that it was or it is quite substantial to begin or to start off with the idea that in discussing about queer theory, let me just share my screen again. There have been various societies in the past that actually do not believe that for example, that there are only that women, let's say, for example, for gender roles, that there are some societies in history that did not exactly conform to the belief that religious roles, for example, are only for men. No? That in church, men can only be the priests because, or for example, or the priests or imams, or because as what we have seen in the video, in prehistoric or in pre-Hispanic times before the arrival of the Europeans, Filipinos now were Filipino women, for more specifically, were were more active in society. Now there was a level of equality between men and women before the arrival of colonizers in the Philippines. So let's continue. Now, moreover, no, before the arrival of European colonizers, in the case of North America, let's move to North America now, class. No, so um, among Native Americans in North America, Native Americans culturally have people expressing themselves based on the role that they identify with, rather than what is expected of them as a man or a woman. So, in Native America class, there are some tribes, non-Native American tribes in among Native American societies, no, that are still existing even up to today. There are some tribes that practice that actually have a culture of having the two-spirit gender. So a two-spirit gender is a cultural characteristic of tribes, of Native American tribes, wherein a person would identify themselves as having four, as any of the four gender groups or gender identities in Native American culture. These identities are female, or rather feminine masculine, and masculine. And a person who would identify, for example, as masculine feminine can be masculine and feminine at the same time, and they can perform roles. Let's say a person who is biologically male at birth, no, a Native American boy who grows up and then identifies as masculine feminine, they would actually um they can dress as a man or as a female or as a woman, no? And then their gender roles in their culture would be both, no? They can do weaving, they can weave and make clothes, which is a gender role that is typically assigned to women, but um, uh, uh, a masculine feminine boy would be open towards performing weaving duties, no? And they are, and moreover, class, no, in among Native Americans, among some Native American tribes, they also, in the past, no, in their history, they also um kept in high regard these two-spirit individuals, or individuals who identify themselves as two-spirit in terms of their gender identity, because two-spirit individuals actually have a sacred role in terms of the spiritual aspects of their tribe, no? A person who is masculine feminine can perform duties as even though they are biologically male, for example, but then they can take on the feminine aspect of their tribe, being spiritual leaders. So now, that explanation that I gave might have been a little vague. Now maybe you won't be able, or you're not able to imagine what a two-spirit individual is. So I'm going to show you some clips again now, class, on Native American two-spirit cultures. You know, so we will look at two videos at this point. Now, gender identity, how colonialism killed my culture's gender fluidity, and what does two-spirit mean?
Gender identity might be one of the most polarizing conversations that's happening on social media right now. In most countries, sex is defined as what you're physically born as, male or female. But gender identity can be much more fluid. A person can be born female and feel more comfortable or identify as male, or vice versa. I've been seeing a lot of young people all over the world from gender fluid societies talking about their traditions online. This is Geronimo from the Native American Navajo community in New Mexico.
She'e Francis Geronimo Louie, and I am Chiricahua Apache born for Diné. I identify as a two-spirit individual. This is my backyard. Just a lot of trees, lots of cactus. There's some mountains over there.
Geronimo identifies as one of the four sacred and ancient gender identities from his culture.
We have masculine, 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 feminine, 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 masculine. Masculine feminine is something that I gravitate towards both spiritually, mentally, physically, and emotionally. The word for masculine feminine is nakle, someone who is male-bodied, has a feminine nature, or who also takes on the roles of a woman and man. I take it quite literally sometimes. I can dress as a female, I can dress as a male. And traditionally, you're supposed to tie up your hair in a tiye. So men's traditionally would be right here, and women's traditionally we would be somewhere up here. We wear bandanas. I know that I'm a male, and I can take on the gender roles of a female. I weave, I cook, I clean.
8,000 miles away in India's capital, Delhi, gender has been more than just male and female for centuries.
Hi, Namaste, I'm Leher, I'm 23 and I was not born in a female body.
In 2014, the Supreme Court recognized a third gender.
I was assigned sex male at birth and I changed my gender medically. However, I'm not what in the Western terminologies you would call a trans third gender or the sacred gender that has the power to bless or to curse. They're regarded as highly sacred and respectable. Gender has never been binary in India. It's always been very, very fluid, especially in Indian mythologies. We have scriptures that describe more than 20 to 28 genders. We have story of Shikhandi. Shikhandi was assigned female at birth. However, the person transformed themselves into a man to fight the battle of Mahabharata.
Over in Australia, transgender people have had different names among Aboriginal communities. Kai identifies as a brother boy.
So a brother boy is a person that's been born female but has a male spirit or masculine spirit. Our understanding of being is so much more than a scientific definition of what is XX chromosome or XY chromosome. We can coexist, but doesn't mean that you should perpetrate hate and violence onto people that don't necessarily believe in the way that you believe.
However, Kai's journey hasn't been easy, as he still faces discrimination in his own community.
As someone that was born a woman and done women's stuff, and then transitioning into a man, you know, it's quite difficult at times to find your place as a person within my culture. And I think, yeah, I'm still on that journey. And for many communities, the history of gender fluidity was lost with colonialism. Sister girls and brother boys history is difficult to document because of the effect of colonization. There's been a lot of shame and stigma.
Pre-colonialism time, gender roles were actually widely accepted amongst my people and our tribe. These individuals who were called Two-Spirit were widely respected when colonialism started to happen. A lot of our people died and were murdered, and so a lot of the teachings and understandings of these people were lost. Forced assimilation, religious conversion all contributed to the idea that Two-Spirit individuals were bad people and they needed to go away. I face a lot of discrimination. It hurts my feelings.
Leher also believes that colonization has meant there's less acceptance of gender diversity in India.
Colonization is what has corrupted the mindsets of Indian folks that today are maybe transphobic or homophobic.
Increasingly, the question of gender identity is becoming much more than how you choose to self-identify. It can decide whether or not you can access biologically divided spaces like toilets and aid shelters, and some sports. But the question of who should have access to these spaces is one of the reasons why questions over gender has become so polarized in Western society. Yet some people question the idea of gender and believe stereotyped ideas around masculinity and femininity are limiting. And in some other parts of the world, the idea of just male and female have been seen as an oversimplification.
All right. So the idea of male and female is an oversimplification. So hopefully, class, this discussion has given us an idea that that I hope it invites us not to think about the fact that, especially for people who have grown up in a culture not here in it, whether that be in your families, especially for people who have grown up in a culture that ostracizes queer people, no, or gay people. I hope that we can maybe start to open ourselves up to the idea that maybe um, male and female aren't the only genders now. Of course, we have been discussing this since the start of the semester now, and I think most of you are already open towards understanding the LGBT, of course, now in our previous lessons. But for some individuals who might still be quite conservative in their thoughts about gender now, that of course I think we are also open towards the fact towards understanding, of course, the LGBT. But yes, maybe male and female isn't the only gender. Of course, that there might be other acceptable ways of uh, of of assimilating gay people now into our society. Of course, they are already. Of course, the LGBT are already assimilated now. But for example, think of a person who might be a little homophobic now, and what can we actually tell that person? I, for one, class, in my family now, I do have some family members who are still a little. They still sometimes use derogatory terms to refer to gay people. For example, they say that bayot ba kay ana niya oy kanay ana bitaw class no. So um or maybe they still believe that same-sex marriages are sinful, that being gay is sinful, no? So um, I address my message, or the previous message that I just gave now, that maybe I address my message, or that previous message that I gave to these types of people, that maybe we these people who are still quite um, who still see gay people as an abomination class. Now, maybe these people can maybe try to open their minds a bit and try to educate themselves, or perhaps they can try to be more open towards understanding that in the case of if of the Native Americans, the Native American culture, or in India, or among the Aborigines, no, maybe that the LGBT might actually have maybe it is possible to integrate the LGBT, into our societies, in a sense that maybe it is possible to understand that it's okay. Now, it's okay to be gay, and perhaps they should try to understand that there are some societies, there are some cultures that actually see the LGBT as sacred. Now that in fact there are some cultures that actually wherein the gay or rather masculine feminine individuals do have a respectable status in society. Hopefully our societies can, or in Filipino society class now, hopefully our country can reach that level. I know that it's wishful thinking, and it's a bit idealistic to assume that could happen to our country, that lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgenders will reach a level of acceptability in the future, no, in our lifetime. Maybe it is a bit idealistic to hope or believe that could happen, but if it's possible among the Native Americans in the past, if it's possible in India before the arrival of colonization, if it was possible in among the Aboriginal people, then maybe it is possible not to have um, accept gay people as a norm, no, or as important members of society, that they do have a very important role, of course. And although we do already acknowledge that now there are many people who do acknowledge, or who do believe that the LGBT community does have an important role in society, but the Philippines is still so far away from actually um, from actually having an openly accepting gay culture. Because later on we will see some we will see the status of the LGBT in our country later on class, because we will be discussing about that later on. So continuing on, let's continue the lecture. Contest the views of established identity theories in order to push for broader discussions on gender issues and eradicate gender equality. So queer theory was a product of the 1970s feminist movement, and queer theorists wanted to steer the discussion away from still categorizing men and women as binary groups, as just male and female. This was established in the 1990s. Now, this body of explanations for uh, for queer, yes, for queers. Now, queer theory is the contention of queer theory. Well, the contention of queer theorists is that there is no set standard for what is normal. So, the central tenet of queer theory is the idea that there is no set standard for what is normal, that being male and female is not the only standard for normal in society, that maybe being lesbian is normal now, being gay is normal, that being bisexual is normal, and that being transgender is normal. So in among queer theorists, they believe that they even contest the idea that male and female is the only normal thing in society. Maybe it is possible to have the LGBT as normal, of course, in society. So that is the contestation of queer theorists. Queer theory believes that norms can change, no? That what we believe is normal in our societies can change, that maybe it can become normal for the LGBT to be accepted, no, in society. So people may or may not fit into these norms, not of being in a heterosexual relationship, for example, being in just a male and female relationship. I've even heard of I think I've discussed this in class before class, a throuple relationship wherein there are three people in a couple. So it can be that there are two men and then one woman, and but all of them are together as a couple. So that means that they love each other. The three of them love each other. So that is another arrangement of a relationship, no? And therefore people may or may not fit into the norms of society of just being in a male-female relationship. So categorical thinking must be constantly challenged if we want to attain equality for all people. Now, queer theory is also a framework of ideas asserting that identities are not stable, that people can change. No? I know that some individuals or some men, for example, only come out as gay later on in life, maybe when they are 40 or 15 or even 60 or 70. They are already senior citizens. So identities are not stable, that a person's gender identity may change in the future. And that's okay, no? So queer theory is also a framework that believes that identities are determined particularly in relation to a person's sex, gender, and or self-expression. There are several ways a person can express his or her sexual self. So let's look at some additional information or additional theories that relate towards queer theory. Now, according to Teresa de Lauretis, I would like you all to go to page 69 class in the book, and we can actually see the photos of each of the theorists mentioned in this chapter. Now, so for Teresa de Lauretis, we have a photo of de Lauretis here in the book. So, according to Teresa de Lauretis, queer theory is a manner of thinking that did not use binary gender constructs, similar to what we have already discussed prior now. Moreover, for Michael Foucault, queer theory's capacity to explain its views without a defined object. So Michael Foucault particularly focused on the capacity of queer theory to explain the view that there is no defined object in queer theory, that this explanation, this body of explanations, refuses the idea that an authority could define sexuality. So take for instance Christianity or Islam, or even the state itself, the government, no. So according to Michael Foucault refused the idea that an authority could define sexuality, that he refused the idea that that Christianity, for example, could define could define or could dictate that female and male relationships are the only way to go. That Michael Foucault explicitly rejects or refuses the idea that or refuses the idea that the Christian church, for example, in my understanding, that the Christian church can have the authority to say that male and female relationships are the only acceptable sexual orientation or the acceptable types of relationships in society. That Michael Foucault inherently refuses that idea that the church, no, or or um uh, or the government can have the authority to define sexuality. So that's an interesting thing to think about, Klasa, because if you think about it, for queer theorists, for example, for Michael Foucault, if since he does believe that these types of authority cannot define sexuality, then who can define sexuality then? Perhaps it can be the individuals now that we don't necessarily have to, according to Michael Foucault, no, we don't necessarily have to believe in what the church says, or what Islam says, for example, on the role of women or the LGBT, you know, or we don't have to believe in what the government says is normal. That if ever the government would say that homosexuality is immoral, for example, I'm sorry to my gay students class, no, but it's a reality that the government, not the Philippine government particularly, believes that homosexuality is immoral, no. So for Foucault, he rejects the idea that the government can have the authority to define, or can have the authority to say that homosexuality is immoral. That Foucault inherently says that the Philippine, for example, now for my application, I believe that Foucault would refuse the idea that, or would not agree with the idea that the Philippine government, has the authority to say that homosexuals are immoral. So the Philippine government doesn't have that authority. They cannot say, or they don't have the control. No, they do not have. Um, the government essentially doesn't have the right to define what is immoral or moral, because for Foucault, at least, he argues that sexuality is not an inherent personal attribute, but rather a cultural category dictated upon those in power. No, so according to Foucault, sexuality is not an inherent personal attribute, but sexuality is a cultural category dictated by those in power. So when let's say, for example, since yes, the church is quite powerful class now in Philippine society. So actually, when we say that only men and women can get married in the church, that's just the church dictating what is sexuality. That sexuality can only be between a man and a woman. But no, that's not true, because that is just the church being in power now and dictating what is acceptable. But if ever the church would say that homosexuality is actually acceptable, then everybody would believe it because the church says it. No, so so essentially, what is true then? What is true? Whatever the authority says, is that the only truth that exists? So I guess Foucault's theory uh, primarily centers around the idea of authority class and the fact that what is acceptable in terms of sexuality is only dictated by those in power. So it is not an inherent personal attribute, but it's actually cultural. That's a very liberating, I guess. That's an interesting idea. This theory can actually be used by lobbyists, no? For example, LGBTQ lobbyists such as the Lad party list. This theory can actually be used by lobbyists in questioning the role of authority. Actually, whenever, let's say, for example, the Senate, no, the Philippine Senate would disallow any resolution that would pass a law for the LGBT, because they, if ever they would not vote on that resolution because on the grounds that homosexuality is immoral. No, theorists, or rather LGBTQ lobbyists, could use the theory of folk cult in what's the term there, in arguing for the fact that the government doesn't have the authority to define sexuality, that the government doesn't have the power to dictate what sexuality should be. So that this theory can be used by lobbyists. Now, moreover, a queer theorist is Eve Sedgwick. So we have a photo of Michael Foucault in our book as well in page 70, and then a photo of Eve Sedgwick as well. So for Sedgwick, the social crisis created by defining sexuality as just heterosexual and homosexual, that was her central theory na the social crisis created by defining sexuality as just heterosexual and homosexual. She Sedgwick also debated on whether sexuality was inherent or socially constructed. Rather, the same with Foucault's idea, perhaps sexuality is just socially constructed. That you being a guy or me being a woman, maybe I am a woman because society says that I should be a straight woman, no, but maybe I can become lesbian as well. Doesn't really follow class, nor maybe I can become bisexual as well. No, it really depends. But the thing there is that it is society that constructs that, and I know that some of you might feel taken aback that what my teacher can become lesbian, or my teacher can become bisexual or transgender. That's already society at work class now, that whatever is the idea of sexuality is socially constructed. No, and it is our countries, nor it is the places that we are born in that actually creates or constructs what our sexuality should be. So that's the idea of that's the theory of Sedgwick. And then lastly, we have Judith Butler, who um, was also mentioned in our lesson on feminism, no, last week. So we discussed about feminism, wherein Judith Butler um, said, that gender is a performance, that you perform your gender roles because you have learned that in your society. So in addition to that theory, Butler challenged the conventional notions of gender. She says that gender is a performance, that there is a concept of gender performativity, which asserts that society and culture created gender roles. So just like in the case of Geronimo in the video on the Native American two-spirit culture, na, that yes, that the Native American culture created gender roles wherein two-spirit individuals can perform gender roles that are traditionally for women, such as weaving and cooking and cleaning. But two-spirit individuals are biologically male, but they can do those gender roles not in their society. However, in our culture, gender roles society and culture creates gender roles. This is actually quite obvious already, and I think it's quite understandable. So take for instance, in our culture, we believe that that the gender role of a father or mother can only be for a man and a woman. That the gender role of marriage, in essence, can only be between a man and a woman. That is created by our society, and it is created by our culture. So the fact that that our fathers their that our fathers and our mothers are performing their gender roles now, because that is what their societies have taught them. But what about for the LGBT community now? That what if they become parents as well? That a man and a man in a relationship, whether or not that is a legal relationship wherein those two men are husbands, no, husbands and husbands, a husband and husband. So um what if in that sense, no, they have an unconventional or not a usual relationship because they are both men. But what if their gender role is also to become parents, no? So their gender role could be that they both would, if ever they would adopt a child or have a surrogate, a child through surrogacy, that their gender role can change because they can both play the role of a mother and a father, no. They can take care of their child. So in essence, society and culture creates gender roles. And our belief even of marriage, that marriage can only be between a man and a woman, is also created by our culture and our society. That how about, well, for queer theorists, they believe that how about, what if, since we are not really conforming to just the norms of society, what if it can be possible that we can create a society or a culture wherein marriage can be between a man and a man or a woman and a woman? That is already happening in America and in other countries, in Australia, in Germany, I think, and in Austria, in the UK as well, I think. But in the Philippines, the same-sex marriage is not, it's not legal yet, no. So that's the idea of Judith. That's the theory of Judith Butler. Now that society and culture creates gender roles, and society and culture also imposes these gender roles as ideal or appropriate. Now, now that would be all for the lesson on queer theory, class. We will have an assessment on queer theory when we meet on April 5, I believe. Oh, sorry, I meant April 5 for my class in MLS 2E. So we will have the assessment during the week of April 5 to 10 for my classes in gender for the second semester of school year 2020 to 2021. So let's move on now, class, to the second part of the lesson for today, the Yogyakarta Principles. Now, as explained earlier, class, the Yogyakarta Principles is an international human rights law. Please go to page 70 at this point now. You can refer to page 70 for this lesson. So as mentioned, the Yogyakarta Principles is an international human rights law that deals with gender and sexual orientation issues, especially on the right to non-discrimination. Now, this lesson, class, on the Yogyakarta Principles is very, very interesting because we will learn in this part of lesson 4 now that how is gender equality for the LGBT in the Philippines, and what could our governments or what could our society do in order to ensure the rights of lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender people in our country, so that they can enjoy their right to express themselves, their right to security, no, so that they can keep their right to be recognized by law and even to have a family. So let's look at those aspects now here in the discussion on the Yogyakarta Principles. So your right to not be discriminated because of your gender identity. later on we will look at some cases or some articles na that explain the status of non-discrimination in the Philippines and some laws in relation to non-discrimination. So the Yogyakarta Principles promises a different future where all people are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That the vision of the Yogyakarta Principles. So the Yogyakarta Principles was signed in, I believe, in 2006, no, if I'm not mistaken, 2007. So the original Yogyakarta Principles was launched on March 26, 2007 in Geneva, Switzerland, and the Yogyakarta Principles were drafted in Yogyakarta, Indonesia in 2006. So the vision of the Yogyakarta Principles is that every person, whether they are just like the individuals that we saw earlier, class now in the video by BBC, Geronimo, Lehar, and the Aboriginal transgender boy, or yes, the Aboriginal transgender boy in the video, all of them are born free and equal. That they are free, that they are equal, that whether they are masculine, feminine, whether they are third gender, or whether they are an Aboriginal boy, no, they are equal as us. That that they they're not any lesser of a person because they are third gender or two spirit. No, they are equal to us. No, and that applies to everybody, class, in the world, in essence. No, that their basic human right is the fact that they are equal to everybody else, whether they are whatever their gender is. No, so I think that that's really important for us to understand, especially for for gay students, or for people who are still quite confused about their standing in society. Now, please know that you are the same as everybody else. That we know that we are the same, and that nobody is more superior than us. That we are just as equal to those who are in power. So whether that is the government or the church, no, we are the same as these people on in authority. That these people in authority are not any better than us. That we are equal to these people in authority, well, regardless of our gender. So that is the idea of equality, class, no? And all of us are born free and equal. So our dignity, whether that is a person who is two-spirit, who is lesbian, who is gay, who is bisexual, who is transgender, your dignity, you have dignity. No, when we say dignity, dignity means worth. No, you have value. So your value as a human being is the same as everybody else. That you have worth. No, you have value, and you are important. So uh, please note that that I hope that we are able to believe in that, na, because it's not a belief, actually it's your right. That every person has that right, whether or not you believe that you have dignity or not. You will always have that right now of dignity. That's your right as a human being, because you are a human being. So you have dignity. It's not a question of your belief, whether you believe in it or not. It is a fact. It is a fact that you have dignity, that you are equal to everybody else. Now, the translation of equality and dignity, however, in society is an entirely different thing, because we can see that, yes, in essence, in human rights, like highfalutin, like imagining the world as equal, or everybody has dignity, but in reality, does that actually happen? I guess in a way, no, definitely not, because we can see that gay people are still being 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 what's the term, tortured in a way, bullied. Gay people are still seen as immoral, no? So in reality, the actualization of a person's dignity isn't exactly perfect, no? But I hope that we can move towards challenging these injustices, class, no, that are happening towards the LGBT. So continuing on, now human rights violations because of a person's sexual orientation or gender identity have happened, no, in the world, particularly in the Philippines. Human rights violations in relation to sexual orientation or gender identity have occurred in the form of extrajudicial killings. These refer to murder, no, actual murder, or rather, um, killing individuals that are gay, no, without due process, or for example, among the police, when the police goes and raids a gay bar, for example, without an actual search warrant, they do not have a right to search a gay bar without a warrant from the court. So that is an extrajudicial um, search, no, and that is illegal. Should be in our constitution. So in a way, that is an example of an extrajudicial search, or to a degree when the police shoots a gay person for being in a gay bar. Now that is an example of an extrajudicial killing. So shooting a gay person because they are in a gay bar and there's not even a search warrant in present. No, so that is, and the police would say that they are merely killing or shooting gay people because they are doing something immoral in a gay bar, and somewhat like it's not even, there's no due process involved in that action by the police. So that's a form of a human rights violation, or that's an example of what we pertain here as extrajudicial killings, Fasna. What else? Torture and ill treatment. So sexual assault and rape among towards the LGBT community. I will show a video shortly, class, now that relate towards human rights violations. Invasions of privacy. Take for instance for people who have AIDS. No, it is illegal for medical personnel to release information about who are patients of AIDS in their hospital. That is an invasion of of the privacy of the AIDS patient. So that should be illegal actually, and that is a form of human rights violation if your privacy is shared, if your private health information is shared to other people. Arbitrary detention, denial of employment and education opportunities. A case in point, class, would be in schools. No, if ever teachers would not accept a student, let's say in an elementary school or in a high school, in a Catholic elementary school, or in a Catholic high school, the nuns or the priests who are running the school would deny enrollment towards a child who is gay. Now that is a form of a human rights violation because the child has the right to education and they should not be discriminated because of their gender. And I think that is quite evident among teachers actually, especially for teachers who are not aware now of the Yogyakarta principles. So for kids now, or for parents who don't know this yet, or and do have a child who is gay or are gay, please know that you have the right to assert your right not to a university or a school that doesn't accept you, or a let's say in an apartment that doesn't accept you, in a job that doesn't accept you because of your gender. So you have a right to report that school, report that business. You have to report them because they can get a penalty for discriminating you. In Cagayan de Oro, we will look at a law later on that actually penalizes businesses, schools, government offices that discriminate against the LGBT and any person, PWD, etc. So that's human rights violation already. If you are denied employment because if you are transgender, you're denied employment. That is a violation of your human right to employment, and a violation of your right to education as well. Serious discrimination in relation to the enjoyment of other human rights. No, so um, we will look at other human rights later on. Now, let's look at a scene class from Die Beautiful, and I think I've mentioned this film already previously in class. Na. So, Die Beautiful is a film in Netflix starring Paula Ballesteros, and it is an award-winning movie that shows the life of transgender women in the Philippines. And the clip that I'm going to show you is very graphic class. This will show a scene that features rape. So I hope that if ever it is a bit too violent for you, I apologize, and you can actually stop watching if you don't want to watch. But please know that I have the right to academic freedom, class, because I am a professor in a university in tertiary education. It is completely fine for professors to show what they want to show to their students as long as it contributes to the lesson or to the academic education of students. I am merely showing this clip in order to educate you on what really happens towards the LGBT in terms of human rights violations. And I think that sex in essence is a very graphic way of showing of how a person is violated. Because in film, ang good class, in film usually shows or usually wants to make a point through action that it's not in a movie that is good would not make a monologue about human rights violation. They would actually show human rights violation through action. And I think the act of rape in essence is, although it should be censored plus no, but I think it's an image. It is a symbol in film. Now let's just look at the artistic aspect of film, because I myself class have also delved into filmmaking actually in the past, and the aspect of art no, shows human reality, and in this art form in film no, it shows that there is an aspect of violation that is told best through action. So hopefully, let's watch the clip now, and hopefully, you will be able to really empathize with the experience of um of the character. So, and what it means to actually go through human rights violations, na, especially in oneself, na, as in terms of the people that they trusted. Because in this clip kasi class, the character thought that they can trust this boy that they liked, but let's watch the clip now in order to understand the story.
Yung gusto ko sa ilinaw ng mata mo. Si Migs, kasama na naman yung jowa niya. Kakais naman. Arte-arte. Ayan na ang chance mo. Agad-agad. Bakla, wala nang iba pagkakataon. Kapag ayan, hindi mo pag ginawa, Go, girl!
Naman mo talaga.
Oo.
Ay, chicks mo. Nalaban mo na to? Bilis ah. Sama ka sa amin. Kakain lang kami. Ano, tara.
Oo nga.
Kakain. Huwag ka na mahiya. Linaban mo naman to eh. Ano? Tara.
Tara na.
Tara.
Ang puta, iniwan ako. Hindi man nga lang ako nilingon. Mas ngayong bakla, second day na wala pa.
Ala ka.
Pero tinawagan mo siya.
Hindi nga sumasagot.
Ano nangyari doon?
Oh my God, sis, eto na si Trisha.
Ay, Trish! Uy, Trisha.
Trish, what happened to you?
Go. Bakla! Bakla. Uy, ano nangyari sa go? Uy. Uy, ano ka ba? Uy, Trisha. Trisha, hintayin mo nga ako. Ano ba kasi talagang nangyari? Huy, bakla! Trisha!
Sandali lang.
Niiyak ka ba?
Chirps lang.
Buntis ka be? Ano nga kasi? Uy! Nakain yata ako eh. Bakla, wag mong ibahin ang usapan. Anong nangyari?
Hindi na ako virgin. Alam ko na yung pakiramdam nung sinasabi mo. Yung feeling ng may nakapasok sa puwet. Nung una pumayag ako, sabi ko kay Migs, okay, basta siya ang mauna. Inisip ko na lang na parang challenge lang. Kakayanin ko to. Lahat naman ng bagay may kapalit. Pero, nung ikaapat na, inisip ko kung rape na ba to? Hindi ko alam. Nalito na ako. Sabi mo, di ba? Masakit naman talaga. Pero pag tiniis mo, magiging masarap din. Hindi naman nila ako pinilit. Hindi rin naman ako pumiglas. Pero parang wala akong nagawa.
Bakla. Bakla, dinudugo ka. Pupunta tayo ng hospital, ha? Halika na, kunin mo na yung bag mo. Halika na.
Sabi mo sa amin, sino mas malaki? Si Migs.
Okay, class. So, that was the clip, no, or the a clip, of course, from the movie Die Beautiful. So, just to continue the discussion. We will just have processing now during our actual class in our synchronous class. So just to show the, although that was a fictional movie class, it wasn't exactly true to life. No, it was a fictional film, but I guess that also doesn't just happen to gay people, to gay boys, no, but also towards women, for example, who are raped actually. But in essence, we want to, I particularly as an instructor want to show that these matters of sexual assault, no, sexual assault and rape are real, and these happen to people, no. And in that sense, what can be done about avoiding or about actually reporting rapists, no? because those boys that were raping Trish, they should actually be imprisoned for that, because the penalty for rape in the Philippines is 20 to 30 years in prison, I believe. Reclusion perpetua, if I'm not mistaken, if it is pushed in court. And but the and I know that many of you, many students, not actually do not believe that any justice can be given towards anyone who experiences any sort of sexual assault or rape. But that's the point of your education, even if I'm not mistaken, class, of us being here in university, in order to change that, no, to 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 stop this vicious cycle of injustice in our justice system. Because how can we expect anything to become better if we just sit by and not do anything, no? If we just allow these um, perpetrators to not get any punishment for the things that they do, no, for homophobia to still continue, how can we just sit by and let these um these violations happen? So whether or not it can our contribution can come in the form of helping a friend, helping ourselves, or actually going all the way um, and pushing for a law, or pushing for laws to address these concerns, it is our responsibility. I hope that we can start with the idea of owning, of having accountability, of owning the problem, so that we can also contribute to solutions. So it's not, what we're doing here in university class is not like, if you want to, you can do it. It's not like that anymore. I feel like we should go beyond that. We should just go beyond like having you to choose between doing something or not. I guess we have to really encourage, or we have to really push our students to take action, no, on issues such as human rights violations, no, because you are the youth class, no, daghan kaayo mo ga-take og gender every semester, and it's like unsay pulos sa inyong edukasyon if wala may buhaton sa inyong matun-an. It's whether or not it could be in the form of you asserting your own right as a young man, as a young woman, as a young gay person, or not. The mere fact that if ever you yourself become empowered to do something about your situation or the situation of someone you know, no, I think that's already a positive thing that can happen to any of my students. But if ever I would see a student of mine who actually goes and lobbies for a law that could address any of these issues that we are going to talk about right now, that would be the main goal of me being your teacher now. And I guess that would be the main achievement or impact, I guess, in this, in any type of gender course now. So I hope that we can take a commitment class now. If ever in the future we can actually take a commitment to address any type of gender issue or human rights violation, we shall discuss more shortly. So the Yogyakarta Principles. Now, human rights mechanisms of the United Nations have affirmed states' obligation to ensure effective protection of all persons from discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The clip that I showed earlier was more on human rights violations, but going back to the idea of the Yogyakarta Principles, please remember that the Yogyakarta Principles talks more on non-discrimination, on not being discriminated for your gender identity. And in that sense, let's review class now. Let's look at the status of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights in the Philippines. This should actually have a small hyphen. please, please excuse the not hyphen, the capitalization. I mean, please excuse just the and there. It should be small caps all the way for the rest of the slides. In any case, now let's look at the status of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights in the Philippines. So the following information that I'm about to present are from a policy, no, a policy paper submitted by Rainbow Rights Project or the Our Rights Project, the Philippine LGBT Hate Crime Watch, and human rights organizations from the Philippines. So this policy paper was submitted to the Congress of the Philippines, I believe, recently. And according to these organizations, this is the status of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights in the Philippines. Now, firstly, Philippine society and culture maintain much prejudice towards the LGBT community, maybe because, of course, of our religious culture now of Christianity and Islam. So there is much prejudice still on the LGBT community. There are also LGBT pride movements, of course, in Mindanao now, Mindanao Pride and Misamis Oriental Pride, with whom I have actually attended events by Mindanao Pride and talks wherein the speakers are from Misamis Oriental Miss or Pride now. And many of them still say that there is still much prejudice towards the LGBT community. For example, if during a recent talk that we had last month no, on bullying to the LGBT, the audience, it was an online talk class now organized by students from Capital University, and in the talk the audience were parents, were students in schools, and then the speakers were transgender women from Miss or Pride, and that was Fritz Katian. One of the speakers was Fritz Katian, who was the leader of Miss or Pride, I believe. And she is a transgender woman. She identifies as a woman already, but she was. I'm not going to explain Fritz's sexual orientation. It's not my place. But in any case, she did, since most of the speakers or most of the audience members of that talk that we had were parents now, one parent actually really expressed that they don't want their child to know about gay people because they don't want their child to become gay. So there was still a lot of prejudice because I myself as an audience member as well, during the talk I was listening to the forum, the question and answer forum, and then this parent just just spoke out and said that they didn't want their child to become gay, and then the speakers were gay, and then how could that parent like be so insensitive that in order to say their stance. I understand their stance, and I know that I myself am I'm a very idealistic person. I'm like, I believe that I still live in a world that wherein gay people are not prejudiced. No, I don't believe that. I don't I don't think that. I actually still, of course, I know that reality wise, in reality, gay people are still quite discriminated in society. No? A case in point was that parent that spoke out against the possibility of her children becoming gay, and she didn't want that. So that in itself is already a form of discrimination. Like somewhat like the speakers, the gay speakers in that talk were very gracious. They actually said that I understand, ma'am, how you feel. They said that, but for me it was really offensive for that parent to say that, and I know that most of that is a form of homophobia actually, class, and that is still quite evident in our society and even among our parents now, that they still think that homosexuals are scary, that having a homosexual child is the scariest thing. That's these types of prejudices still very much exist in our culture now, and there's much prejudice still on towards the LGBT. Now, the revised penal code of the Philippines, as well as other criminal laws, does not have provisions punishing hate crimes, which is absurd, class. Now, hate crimes such as I guess there are hate crimes that we have heard from the news now, and maybe to a degree what happened to Trish in the video, in the clip that I showed from the movie Die Beautiful, was a form of a crime already now, but it wasn't exactly a hate crime towards gay people. But hate crimes are not illegal in the Philippines. Would you believe that if a person says something hateful towards the gay community, that's legal in our country? What? Like how? that should be illegal from this like a long time ago, but there are no laws against that. So I guess it's also it's not the role of lawyers actually to put that law. It's the role of every Filipino citizen, whether that is a 15-year-old gay boy or a 60-year-old retiree. It's our job to put those laws in place. It's not the government's job. We are in a democracy, and in a democracy, the people have the power to push for laws that they want in their government. So if there are if there are no laws against hate crimes, it's our fault because we didn't push for those laws in the first place. We have to also work for this class, and we have to think about the possibility um, of actually doing action and going to the council, not to the city council or of the Senate to push for these laws. No, so the Philippines has no comprehensive anti-discrimination law as well. There are some anti-discrimination laws within the local governments in the city level, but only one city in the Philippines thus far, or a few, have non-discrimination ordinances. Now, around there have been around 141 deaths of LGBTs with varying elements of motives of hate or bias, extrajudicial killing, and or discrimination-related violence that have been documented since 1996. So the Supreme Court has ruled against a ministerial decision of the Commission on Elections that denied accreditation from LADLAD, an LGBT party list. So let's just look at the level of bigotry. I'm not sure if you could say it's bigotry class, but in our justice system, like homophobia is still quite evident, no? And I think this is quite obvious for everyone who is Filipino. Everybody knows that the government is very much Christian, and the government is very much based on like it's very much based on Christian morals, and they don't think that having an LGBT party list is important in the House of Representatives, but we need an LGBT party list in the House of Representatives in order for us to create these laws that are needed, and everyone in this class now, every student in my classes who have the capacity to vote next year during the national elections, the presidential 2022 presidential elections, get register to vote, and vote for the LADLAD party list in order for them to have a seat in Congress, so that you can only basically vote for only one party list. And if you're going to vote for a party list, don't just like randomly choose a random name there, Abamin, because you think Abamin can actually make a difference. If you want to make a difference in the Philippines, vote for an LGBT party list na, so that you can really make a difference in that way. So and it's not even just like a decision to have that party list in the ballots. It was actually in the level of Comelec that this party list isn't even allowed to be in the ballot because of the fact that they are a gay party list. And it's absurd because any type of news that comes out class like this, we have to also rally against this now, because this isn't right. Like that is a form of discrimination. And we're talking about the Yogyakarta principles, but our own government is outruling an LGBT party list. Or where's the non-discrimination there? We are supposed to be a member of the United Nations. Yes, the Yogyakarta principles is under the United Nations Human Rights Council. Now, this is a UN set of principles, and if we are a member state of the UN, why is the Philippine government outruling an LGBT party list? That's a form of discrimination. So we have to work towards that class. So the Supreme Court also rendered a decision that denied the rights of transgenders to self-determination and legal changes of identity. So I think this is known to most now, that, or maybe we are not aware of this, but our Supreme Court now, the Supreme Court and the judicial system, or the judicial branch of the government, also outruled a law against changing the names of transgenders. And I think this is so absurd, class, because there are so many gay individuals in the Philippines that still carry their legal name that was their dead name, basically the dead name that is there. If you are a gay man in your 70s or in your 60s, in your 50s, you cannot legally change your name from when you were a man now into being a woman. So for example, you were born as Thomas, but then that is your dead name because you don't bring the name Thomas anymore if you are a gay man. If for example you change your name to Tanya, no? So you already have been called Tanya for majority of your life, but because of our law in the Philippines that it is our law now, or the Supreme Court essentially has denied the rights of transgenders to change their identity, to legally change their name. So they would still have to write in their forms Thomas. Every single form that they would write would be Thomas, especially if it's a legal form. Now, their name Tanya cannot be acknowledged. So it's really absurd, class. And on that level, some action should be done. And if we have an LGBT party list in Congress, that can change actually. So the Philippine permanent representatives, even in the United Nations level, class, no, are ambassadors in the UN. Filipino ambassadors who are supposed to bring the concerns of Filipinos in the UN level. Our Filipino diplomats themselves have not supported a statement that would end violence, criminal sanctions, and related human rights violations based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So there was a ano class na a statement that was released by the UN. Allow me to just excuse me. Allow me to just share the share about this class no. So now okay. Now, looking at, okay, the Philippine permanent representatives of the United Nations did not support both the June 2011 joint statement at the UN Human Rights Council urging states to end violence. So this was in 2011, class, that the Philippine representatives did not support a statement that would end violence, criminal sanctions, and related human rights violations towards the LGBT community. And the UN General Assembly resolution, they also did not support the UNGA resolution, which included protection for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people from extrajudicial executions. So that's sad. The Commission on Human Rights has signed memorandums in the Philippines. No, however, a good positive thing is that the Commission on Human Rights has signed memorandums that would start projects that would educate and strengthen protection programs for human rights based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So there are already projects that would educate and strengthen protection programs for human rights. Now, in Cagayan de Oro, let's discuss about an ordinance in CDO class on non-discrimination, just for us to be aware, no, especially for gay students or lesbian students, no, bisexual students or transgender students. Please know that you have a right to report any school or any person, maybe even in public utility vehicles, no, any person, or even in apartments that would not accept gay people. You have a right to report these people, no, in order for them to be penalized for discriminating you because you are LGBT. So it was passed last year. Now the Cagayan de Oro Diversity and Equality Ordinance was passed to the City Council in August 13, 2020, and it is a landmark ordinance penalizing discrimination against members of the LGBT community, PWDs, COVID-19 patients, and medical frontliners. So any person who denies service towards the LGBT, PWDs, COVID patients, and medical frontliners can be penalized now if ever they would refuse service because or discriminate against these individuals na. So the ordinance imposes the penalties of 1 year imprisonment and fines ranging from 1,000 to 10,000 pesos for offenders. And to implement this ordinance, to implement this ordinance efficiently, we have the Cagayan de Oro Diversity and Equality Commission. So please know that there is a commission in CDO called the Diversity and Equality Commission, which has a mediation board. So a mediation board will to be headed by the city mayor will be set up to entertain complaints from aggrieved parties. So the chair of the mediation board is the diversity and equal is the city mayor, no, or Mayor Oscar Moreno himself is the chair. But I know that they have coordinators on the ground who will actually accept the complaints. So you rest assured that your local government. I am not campaigning for any political party class now, because that's not my job. Actually, as a professor, I have to be neutral, politically neutral in my classes. So I'm not campaigning for any politician now, but please know that your local government in Cagayan de Oro, being neutral now, they have you can approach the city government. Just go to the city government in order to file a complaint, and then your complaint will be entertained, and your complaint will be any perpetrator will be fined. It's also a good idea, class, to take a video of any person who would discriminate you. For example, if the discrimination is currently happening, you could either turn on your voice recorder app in your phone. As you talk to an employer, for example, during your interview, if they discriminate you, you can record the whole conversation in your phone through a voice app, or you can even just set up your camera secretly, no, and film the person as they say or as they talk. Even if you go to an apartment and you ask for, if you're a gay person and you go to an apartment and you are denied a place in that apartment because of your sexual orientation, and even if you're just a regular straight guy now and you're discriminated, you don't have to be gay to be discriminated in any way. You can report that. So just to have evidence, class, no. And in your school, for example, if your teacher discriminates you because you are gay, you can also do the same thing, like record the whole scenario with through your phone as evidence. If there's no evidence, you can just file the complaint, and that will be enough. No, you don't need a video to prove the what happened, but you do need the name of that person that you are going to report. Ensure that this will ensure that victims would have a legal body to which they could air their complaints. So, for example, drivers of public utility vehicles had refused frontliners from NMMC at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, any driver who refuses to to um to have to have nurses no ride their tricycles, for example, or jeepneys, can be penalized for discrimination. So they can be given a fine of 1,000 to 10,000 pesos. So please know your rights, class. Going back to the Yogyakarta principles, we have going back now. Now the Yogyakarta principles, since it is an international human rights law, there are 29 principles of the document, and these are grouped into 7 basic human rights. And these basic human rights are rights to universal enjoyment of human rights, non-discrimination, and recognition before the law. Please refer to page 72 in the book. So rights to universal enjoyment of human rights and non-discrimination and recognition before the law refer to an example of this right is laws criminalizing homosexuality violate the international right to discrimination. So principles 1 to 3 set out the principles of the universality of human rights and their application to all persons without discrimination, as well as the right of all people to be recognized before the law. Second basic human right is rights to human and personal security. So, example, the death penalty continues to be applied for consensual adult sexual activity. Moreover, principles 4 to 11 addresses fundamental rights to life. Excuse me. Rights to life, freedom from violence and torture, privacy, access to justice and freedom from arbitrary detention. The third basic human right is economic, social, and cultural rights. These refer to the importance of non-discrimination in the enjoyment of economic, social, and cultural rights, including employment, accommodation, social security, education, and health. So, example, lesbian and transgender women are at increased risk of discrimination, homelessness, and violence. So, girls who display same-sex affection face discrimination and expulsion from educational institutions. Fourth, rights to expression, opinion, and association. This emphasizes the importance of the freedom to express oneself, one's identity, and one's sexuality without state interference based on sexual orientation or gender identity. An example, a peaceful gathering to promote equality on the grounds of sexual orientation was banned by authorities, and participants were harassed and intimidated by police and extremist nationalists, shouting slogans such as "Let's get the fags" and "We'll do to you what Hitler did with Jews." So those are violations of expression, opinion, and association. Fifth is freedom of movement and asylum. Refugee protection should be accorded to persons facing a well-rounded fear of persecution based on sexual orientation. This right highlights the right of persons to seek asylum from persecution based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Sixth, rights to participation in cultural and family life. So this addresses the rights of persons to participate in family life, public affairs, and the cultural life of their community without discrimination based on sexual orientation. So states have an obligation not to discriminate between different sex and same-sex relationships in allocating partnership benefits, such as survivors' pensions. Lastly, rights to redress and accountability. No? So this affirms the importance of holding rights violators accountable and ensuring appropriate redress for those who face rights violations. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has expressed concern about impunity for crimes of violence against LGBT persons and the responsibility of the state to extend effective protection. Now, class, let's continue to the discussion on the status of a promotion and protection of LGBT rights on the ground, implementation of the international human rights obligations. So this is from the same document submitted by Our Rights, now Rainbow Rights, and the LGBT Human Rights Watch, the document that I discussed earlier. So this is just a continuation of what was discussed in the same document. Now, to look at the status of the LGBT in the Philippines, let's look at each of the 7 basic human rights in the Yogyakarta Principles and how these human rights are being implemented today, or what's the status of these human rights in the Philippines today. Firstly, for the right to equality and non-discrimination. In our country, there is the labor code na. So the labor code of the Philippines has no prohibition of both direct and indirect discrimination. And neither sexual orientation nor gender identity is mentioned in the labor code. So apparently it is okay. Employers can actually discriminate against a transgender who could apply in their office, no, because there are no laws yet in our country that prohibits discrimination in our labor code. Moreover, so in relation to right to equality and non-discrimination, the recommendations of the groups that I mentioned earlier were discrimination based on sexual orientation should be prohibited in our law. And the state should direct executive agencies to draft memorandums. So the state should direct executive agencies to draft memorandums, circulars, and programs that would explicitly protect human rights based on sexual orientation. So there should be an executive agency in our government that would actually make programs that would explicitly protect human rights. The next right under the first right as well is in terms of the law. So the right to recognition before the law. Now, in the Philippines, there is no law to address the procedure of changing one's sex in legal documents. Excuse me, class. So, that's interesting, class, because if, for example, for a person who identifies as gay, no, so or transgender, biologically female, let's say, and then changes their sex to male. So in our country, it is not allowed not to change your sex. So there's no law to address the procedure of changing one's sex in legal documents. What are the effects of a person? What could be, if you are a transgender man, no, biologically born female, and then changes one's sex to male, well, what could be the implication for a transgender man? Should they just let their identities still female, even if they have already changed to male? No, so um, is it really a big deal? You know what, class? It's actually a big deal because for a transgender person, they don't identify as their old gender anymore. That person is already dead to them. They are already a new person trying to live a new life, trying to live their truth. And it's somewhat like every time you fill in a form, legally, you cannot write male if you are a transgender man because you have to write a female. And it's somewhat like traumatic for these individuals to actually refer to their old lives when they were still living as biologically female, for example, no. So somewhat like psychological bitaw siya, class, nga dili nimo you cannot um legally claim your new identity because your country doesn't allow it. So this has to change. And aside from that, no, there are also other effects such as compromised access to public services. For example, in your card, no, if you are a transgender man, but then you still have female in your identification card because it's not yet allowed for you to change your sex in your legal documents, then for instance, what public service could be denied of you? Maybe if you work in a male position in a job. So if you apply to become a teacher, for example, as a transgender man, and then you are denied that job because in your ID it says female even though you're clearly a male, then that could be, even though it's not really a public service, but that's an example of how you can be denied an opportunity now because in your ID it says a different thing, like your gender is different from what you really what gender identity you really have already at present. So public services, difficulties with family issues, travel, it's the same thing, no, that if a consul looks at your official identification card, and if a person is transgender now, they could be denied access towards a visa, for example, if because there are some questions about their identity. So these are really important, class, na having or changing one's sex in legal documents. So what else? Travel, immigration, healthcare, livelihood, the right to marry. Uh, Moreover, here are the recommendations for rights to recognition before the law. So legal recognition of the rights of transgender. It is recommended that there should be legal recognition of the rights of transgender and intersex persons, and legally arrange a procedure to change a person's sex in their legal documents. Moreover, the justice system should review its jurisprudence, render a report, and build capacity in recognizing the rights of the LGBT before the law. The Department of Health should provide adequate information and support to transgender persons regarding surgery, healthcare costs, and mental health care in relation to transitioning to the preferred sex as well. Because kulang pa kaya atong health systems, class, for transgender people, no, nga dili pa covered ang kuan, then pa kay dili covered. Dapat ma-cover na sad siguro na as long as kanang qualified sila mo avail ana nga health nga kuan, health program, or because it's related to one's health. If you have seen the movie The Danish Girl, no, the Danish Girl, it starred Eddie Redmayne as the first transgender woman who underwent sex change, no, namatay baya siya sa iyang procedure na nagpa-sex change siya kay kuan kanang dili pa kay sophisticated ang technology at nga time nga para successful ang operation sa sex change class ba. So kuan bitaw siya, it's one's health at stake. So included po ang mental health care ana kay ang imuhang how to rationalize your experience transitioning from let's say from a man to a woman, no, that has to also be taken care of. Mahal kaayo ang kuan gyud class ang kani bitong magpa-psychologist ka sa Philippines, 1.5 ang session, so murag dili gid siya kuan viable gyud. So dapat na gibuhaton ang atong TOH ana. Right to security of the person. There are no coordinated. So in relation to security class, like for example, what happened to Trish, no, in the clip that I showed earlier, their security against any form of violence. There are no coordinated and comprehensive state or even non-state mechanisms that monitor the instances of discrimination, bias, prejudice, and violence that LGBT Filipinos face due to homophobia, transphobia, and machismo. So take for instance katong naitabo sa talk about bullying by the LGBT. Kung kato bitaw na kung naay let's say elderly person who is homophobic, kumustorya sila nga they hate gay people. Kung dili na siya illegal sa tong country, pero kung i-penalize bitaw na siya class ang homophobia, di ba mawala man na siya ang homophobia, or we're not saying that homophobia will disappear, but people would actually not become homophobic, you could say, but any type of violence, no, against LGBT will be addressed, pero there are no mechanisms to monitor discrimination. If naalay mechanism, for example, if ever a person hears someone saying anything derogatory towards gay people, they could report that, no, or there could be a program nga kaning itudlo bitaw ang tanan tao nga it's not okay to be homophobic. And if illegal, if i-penalize kina siya class, if imong illegal, then ay program nga i-educate ang tanan, no, na information campaign to educate people that if ever they hear someone say anything homophobic, do anything homophobic, they should report that person so that that person can be given given some a form of punishment, no, or penalty. So that can actually really change how gay people are discriminated and how hate crimes occur in the Philippines. Pero wala yan ang mechanism bito class. So that's the problem, or that's the situation right now in our country. Moreover, in terms of security of the person, LGBT human rights defenders in the Philippines, particularly in Muslim areas, are under pressure from community authorities to conduct their activities less openly. So dili kayo in religious, in ultra religious communities, LGBT human rights offenders cannot exactly openly express their rallies, no, or their initiatives for fear of being targeted by religious radicalization. So whether that be from the Christian or Muslim faiths, no, there's an increasing religious radicalization pattern or tendency or culture that we are noticing today in the Philippines nga mas daghan ang ka-radicalized religious individuals, no. The police repeatedly conducted raids of gay saunas, old cinemas, and parks in Metro Manila on different charges of vagrancy, indecency, pornography, prostitution, sex trafficking, operating without license, and other flimsy reasons. So that's also a violation of a person's security. Kani, di ba ka pwede mo sulod lang ka diya, mag-raid ka niya, wala kay warrant niya, kanang tungod lang kay imo silang you just assume that there is indecency or pornography or prostitution happening in the place. There has to be due process. And if moingon mo class nga kani si Ma'am Colleen mura gini siya idealistic na mura galive siya sa isa ka bubble nga perfect ang kalibutan. Of course I know that the world is not perfect no, but the thing here is that the thing here is that we know, but this is not right. I guess dili mo gud na maayo class nga gina-allow na bitaw nato ni nga mahitabo ni nga mga butang kay tungod abi na tong okay ra kay wala na tay pakialam, apathetic na ta, wala tay pakialam sa mahitabo sa tong nasod. Pero the thing there is that mo nang rason nga nung walay gakabag okay wala may pakialam mga tao, so why not, and I'm not assuming as well nga walay pakialam ang tanan now, because I know that there are students who actually care and actually want to make a difference, and I know that you have so much potential class mga students diri sa Liceo, daghan kay mag potential gyud kay gakit ani ako inyong potential sa inyong trabaho so far sa semester. So I challenge you, if you're really that good of a student, you have that much potential, use your potential and actually do something about extrajudicial raids, no? If you can do it, then you can really make a difference, good. And I am actually ako klase, I'm part of an organization called Global Changemakers. Mao gini ang organization gi-reframe din ako siya niya. This was us 10 years ago. So I was part of Global Changemakers during a summit in the United Kingdom, in London, UK. This was my certificate, and muna bitaw nga ginapush ginako ng mga na class kami magod kay I have been trained in being a volunteer and being an activist. I am an activist no, and my advocacies are on poverty alleviation particularly, pero kani po sa gender as well, so and environment. So kanang kani bitaw mga yan no, I am a person who does know what I'm talking about no, because I am part of an international network of activists, and kanang kumake ako na mismo nag-ingon nga naamoy potential nga magbuhat mo og something good sa ani nga mga issues nga naisgutan nato. So I hope that you can believe that no, and something can happen even though nata sa pandemic karon, but maybe in the future or in our own little ways at home now we can contribute to these because in policy making dagan man mga policy making mga organizations naga-work at home karon sa paghimo ani nga mga balaod, considering as well that hapit na elections next year, so pivotal kay na siyang elections next year para ma-push na to ang mga balaod nga gusto na to may tabo no. So next, some recommendations in relation to security of the person. Hate crime should be legislated in Philippine Congress as a particular criminal offense. Second, define hate crime and implement procedures in the investigation of incidents, assessing justice mechanisms, and serious prosecution of accused parties. Take note, serious prosecution of accused parties. Dapat kay naagid na seryoso gid ta nga kanang kung naa gani tawo mo ingon gamay nga komentaryo about homophobia, ato gina sila nga hatagan og prosecution gid, dili gid pwede nga mag hate crime sila mag nga kanang imo ingon. What's a hate crime, by the way? A hate crime is a form of violence no, whether in the form of people making banners saying that let's get the fags. So kana siya kanang maghimo gyud ka cyber nga kanang hate crime that we hate fags, or we'll do to you what Hitler did with the Jews. That's a form of hate crime if naay mo himog banner ana, or if naay mo ingon ana mismo verbal lang siya, hate crime na siya. Dapat kay i-prosecute ng mga tao nga mo ingon og mayan ang statement, dili na siya okay. Dapat kay mapriso na sila or tagan sila penalty na ay may tabo gyud, kay walay may tabo kung dili na sila ma-penalty. Nya mo sumbong gid ang tao, dapat mo adto gid kadto City Hall, mag-effort ka or manawag ka sa hotline kay para magkuan gid ka kanang imo gid ang filean og complaint, dili na siya mo na siya class na part sa nato no. Pati pud ang pulis po dapat sad kay paspas pud ang trabaho sa pulis, dili lang hinay-hinay. Dapat ang pulis mismo ang moadto gid diha sa offender niya, ang pulis gid mismo ang mudakop, dili lang nga maulat na naay mo report. So kana siya. States should work with civil society to establish mechanisms that would monitor the instances of discrimination as well. Now, let's go to the third human right mentioned class, right to the highest attainable standard on health and protection from medical abuses. The third human right mentioned in the Yogyakarta Principles was economic, social, and cultural rights, but under social rights would be health, no? So because the health is a social right, and under health is the right to the highest attainable standard of health and protection from medical abuses. Now, the Philippines has the HIV/AIDS Control Law of 1998, which provides inadequate protection of healthcare access rights. So again, kani bitong inadequate protection of healthcare access. So dili maka-access og healthcare ang mga AIDS nga patients, and health information privacy rights as well, nga dili sila makip ang ilang privacy. So, moreover, medical personnel, kani siya class, medical personnel also occasionally exhibit judgmental and erroneous behaviors during diagnosis and treatment of LGBTs, which discourage beneficial health-seeking practices among LGBTs. Nako istorya ni class kay kanang it's not really related to LGBTs, but for women who actually request for reproductive health tools from the barangay level. So I have a friend nga niadto siya og health center class, niadto siya health center unya nangayo siya og pills, pregnant kana bitong birth control pills kay she was sexually active and she didn't want to get pregnant yet, so niadto siya sa barangay, nangayo siya og pills. Hala, kay gistorya siya sa doktor, nang tanang ang doktor nga nung ga-sex ka. Ana bitaw class niya, mura bitaw gindiscriminate siya nga sexually active siya nga she was just looking out for her own self, no, sa iyang own health, pero like kana bitong mo discriminate ang mga taga barangay kay kung sa imong gabuhaton sa imong sex life, murag wala na sila dapat kay wala na sila discrimination ihatag, kana bitong unsa man ang form of discrimination, kana pa lang sa tunada pa lang daan nga sila magud kay mga kuan sila kanang straight edge Katoliko sila, gato sila chapel every Sunday, nagasimba sila na makadungog din sila babae nga mangayo bitaw og kuan, mangayo og ayudi baka niya wala pa siya bana, i-discriminate bitaw dayon class kay kanang nganong magkuha kag birth control dapat i-abstain ka until marriage. Dili man na nimo dapat i-impose ang imong religious beliefs sa tao nga moadto sa health center kay doktora ka, dili man na dapat may tabo. Dapat sila dili sila mo judge sa tao nga moduol sa ilaha kay na sila sa gobyerno. So kana mga gagmay bitaw nga mga yan nga mga kuan class ng mga attitude sa mga medical personnel nga mo judge sila sa tao kay tungod kay kanang tungod kay lahi sila og sexually, no, lahi ang ilahang values sa medical personnel kay mga medical personnel religious pud kayo, sila pud gina-judge nila ng mga tawo nga moadto sa ilang hospital kay tungod kay sexually active sila or gay sila, lahi ang ilang sex life, no. So bitaw dili dapat magyan ng medical personnel. So in the case of LGBTs who are diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease, what if ila bitaw dayon i-discriminate nga tungod kay mo na siya nasakit ka tungod kay bayot ka, that is discrimination and that is unprofessional, and dili na siya dapat ang attitude sa isa ka medical personnel nga ga-handle og STD case, for example. So in that sense, recommendations: redraft and strengthen the Philippine HIV/AIDS control law to provide sensitivity in the protection of men having sex with men and transgender youth. Focus on the Philippine National Police to institutionalize public health goals in police work. So dapat ma-institutionalize ang public health goals, no, and end the practice of harassing the LGBT community among the police. Develop educational programs for health workers. I am actually open towards talking to the city government class na ako. Open ko mag-talk ko sa mga barangay health workers. Niya ako silang tudluan na dapat kay dili sila mag-discriminate. I'm open to that. I'm also qualified to give that talk because I'm a professor no in gender. So develop educational programs for health workers regarding sexual orientation and gender identity and the specific health needs, diagnostics, and treatment regimens of LGBTs. Lastly, we have the rights to family, which is the sixth human right. That is rights of participation in cultural and family life. Now, in relation to rights to family, the Philippines, lawmakers in the Philippines have repeatedly tried to file bills that would ban same-sex marriages. Bawal pagid kayo same-sex marriage ato. Take note, class, nga civil law is different from ecclesiastical law, as what I've learned recently na ang kaning ecclesiastical law kaning sa simbahan among Catholics at least lahi, pero sa Muslim law lahi pod ang rules about divorce, pero I'm not really sure about homosexuality sa Islam, no. Pero kana siya no nga pero ang civil law kay lahi man na siya sa church law, pero diri sa atong country bawal pag ang same sex marriage syempre tungod kay heavily Christianized kaya nga to ang government. Ako class Christian ang pud ko, wala mo ko nag-ingon nga kanang kuan na gyud kaning lahi ang upang lantaw gyud class, even though I am quite religious in a way sa Catholic, no, pero actually I've learned as well class that dissent is allowed in the church. It's okay to not agree. It's even healthy to not agree with what the church teaches. Muna ang gitudlo sa akong minister actually sa ko recently karon lang nga week sa Holy Week, no. Gingnan ko sa akong minister nga kana okay raman nga di ka motuo sa uban ginatudlo sa simbahan, healthy na inoon na siya. Pero ang importante kay kana imo relationship sa Ginoo. But in any case, yeah, lawmakers in the Philippines ban same-sex marriages. And then the court allows annulment of marriages on the grounds of homosexuality. This is discrimination, class. Ano bitong, so I know a teacher, and I do know a teacher or a friend who is separated from their wife because they came out as gay later on in their marriage. And kana bitong, okay, so pwede ka ma-annul basta pwede mo magbulag divorce sa imong asawa or annul, legally annul, ganang meaning void ang inyong marriage. Void ang inyong marriage if in the first place bayot din ang imong bana or tumboy ang imong asawa. So we're discrimination lagi kay na okay ra lugar nga magbulag mo kay tungod kay bayot siya. And mo bitaw dili siya sakto class nga murag discriminatory kay siya nga balaod. And usual custodial rulings award the children of such unions to the non-homosexual parent. So dili nila gina-base ang kanang moadto ang mga bata, ang ilang mga bata kung magbulag sila, dili nila gina-base sa capacity sa parent nga mubuhi sa bata, gina-base nila sa kuan sa gender sa parents. So kung lalaki ka, dili pwede mo adto imong mga bata sa imuha kay tungod kay lalaki ka, or like if bayot to ang parent nimo, let's say tumboy mong mama, dili pwede mo atong mga bata sa imong tumboy nga mama. So murag discriminatory gid siya class. What if mas maayo dai mo atiman ang imong tumboy nga mama kaysa sa imong papa nga straight lagi pero di ka mao mag-atiman og bata bitaw, iabilin na sa yaya ang mga bata. So murag bitaw dili na dapat kay ang basis sa pag-atiman sa bata kay kung kinsay maayo mo atiman, no. So moreover, the agency overseeing adoptions, the DSWD, allows adoption by single LGBTs. Pwede ra mag-adopt ang single LGBT. In the movie Die Beautiful, Trisha actually adopted a girl, no, a baby girl, pero walay asawa si Trisha. But however, in the Philippines, dili pwede mag-adopt ang same-sex couple. So if isa ka couple nga gay couple, that is a man and a man together in love, and then if they adopt a child, dili pwede sila katagan og bata, no, di sila pwede ka-adopt kung same-sex couple sila. So hindi gyapon maayo, not for two persons of the same sex. So okay ra kung gay ka na nakay bata, pero ikaw ra isa, pero dili pwede nga naa kay partner ni na amoy bata. Tungod lagi daw kay just like what we said earlier on queer theory class, kay ang authorities kay ingon sila nga ang only way for a child to have parents is if the parent is a man and a woman. So mo lagi na nga mo ingon ang authority, ingon lagi si Foucault nga dili man na siya, only society says what is right. So the society constructs and the people in authority dictates what is right. So actually sa tinuod lang ang society ra ang giingon nga babae ug lalaki ra gid ang pwede nga may magpapaw. Pero sa tinuod lang pwede kaayo mahimong parents ang lalaki ug lalaki or isa ka, let's say lesbian couple, babae ug babae ra, pwede ra kay na sila mahimong parents sa tinuod lang yun. Kay nga naman kay I mean moingon sila nga ang bata nila kay mo grow up na niya murag distorted siguro ang childhood kay mo kita siya natural ang mamagpapa nga lalaki. Let's look at some stories class no in America for example na aga kay tabo naman na siya ang same sex nga mga parents or families. And I myself have an aunt who is lesbian class no who lives in another country. Di na ako isa ba kay privacy na lang sa ko auntie pero ang ako auntie she has been lesbian all her life and I'm not sure if she's married. She was legally married to a man pero just for visa or citizenship purposes no but nagbulag sila adto pero like she is a lesbian and I guess I'm not sure if my aunt has an actual life partner now, but in the country where she's living in right now. Pero sabi to if ever ang akong auntie kay na ay anak na nag-adopt siya niya nagpadako siya sa bata niya yung parents kay babae. Okay ra gid kay classmate ako na if na ako niece bito or nephew nga gi-adopt sa akong auntie niya ning dako tong niece or nephew nga uban sila sa if ever na partner ang akong auntie niya babae silang duha nagpadako sa bata niya ang bata lang as long as gisakto bitog dako okay ra gyud na I have like two recommendations for shows class no we have kaning American Horror Story sa I think season 6 to siya katong sa cult nga kanang season ato nga season sa American Horror Story kay na is story of a gay couple lesbian couple no played by um uh, Alison Pill I believe niya katuding si naa sa AHS so ano kaning nice story nila kay na lesbian couple gid sila nagkuan sila class nag artificial insemination bitaw kana bitong isa sa ila kana boros so nasa lay bata nga kuan isa sa ila kay naburos so nasa lay bata gid silang dual gay couple sila ang bata kay love kinila ilang bata lalaki ilang bata niya isa sa ila ang naburos atong nga baby no so kuan okay naman ang bata wala may kanang anything love magani kinila ilang anak niya dili man siya kuan dili man siya nga more nga lopsided ang childhood sa bata okay ra magid ang bata normal raman ang pagdako kabalo na siya nga love kay siya sa iyang mothers so do ka ang mama another show is sa Glee so kanay sa Glee American gyapon nga show so si Rachel Berry was raised by gay dads no so wala siya mama kana na siya mama pero kaning biological mother she met her biological mother but she grew up with two gay dads and she grew up fine wala man sad siya nahimong gay pod nga bata she grew up as a straight girl young woman all the way niya kuan pag ikay siya talented kay siya kay kuan siya kanang gipadako siya sa parents so okay ra gid ba ya class nga mudako ang bata sa isa ka same sex couple possible man siya gakahitabo siya sa America pero sa Philippines may sila abomination na gid kayo that's just society saying that it's an abomination it's not true because why because it is happening in America and it doesn't mean although may dagan kay moingon nga America is going down na gyud like silang society pero dili man siguro maguba ang kalibutan murag gapadayon pa man gatuyok pa man ang kalibutan maski pa if na same sex na couples diba mura bitog I know that this discussion is turning a little weird now already but the thing there is that that's the point class no it's just society saying what should be the norm or not so that's what we're trying to say lang but I hope nga open gyapon ako I am pro pair same sex couples na mag-adopt of children okay ra gid ko ana kay kining may na lang gani kay ang mga bata kay na sila parents no kay dagan kay mga orphans bitaw sa mga orphanage niya walay mga magpapa so lisod gyud kaayo niya or rather walay parents like dili pa magpapa pwede man nga walay papa o papa walay mama kung same sex couple so ana as long as maayo pud may nalana kaysa kana bitang walay ayo nga parents na walay pakialam sila mga bata niya dili kana bitang gubot kaayo nga family unsa man imo kanang gubot ki nga family nga walay gugma pero or kaning same sex couple nga dagan gugma may mo atiman og bata di ba may na lang dito na lang ang bata mo to sa same sex couple ya dili man mahimong gay ang bata kung same sex couple ang iyang parents normal raman pag dako pareha sa gakita po sa US no or sa lauban country. I mean, I'm not saying a normal na ang bata ang straight, no? I'm not saying, erase that word. Pagdako sa bata, kay dili na sila gay pagdako sa bata nila. Pagdako sa bata, kaya maya po na, I mean, straight kaya po ng bata, dito. And if mahimong gay anyway ang bata, doesn't mean tungod kay iyang parents kay gay kasi mag-gay po siya. Nothing wrong with being gay. Mura bitaw, okay, so iyang parents kay kanang lesbian, siya nahimo po siyang lesbian pagdako niya. Nothing wrong with that. Like, may good weird sila nga, abomination, naging kayo, kay, daghan na kay bayo, pero I'm like, doesn't follow, no, marag, daghan pa mangyapon straight people, no, what's important is that we care about society, we care, we have, basta, anak class, more bitaw, gaatipan pa ta sa tong nature and everything para fight ng climate change, that's important. So, what's important is basically how a person no more mas importante magyud ang kinaiya ang character sa tao kaysa sa iyang sexual orientation mo man importante kaysa sa daghan kay walay ayo nga mga straight people wala gyapon ayo so sa lugar murag may na lang nang gay nga person nga grabe ka buutan kaysa na mga walay ayo nga straight na tao bitaw like if you have to choose if you would have to make me choose. So that's that class. And then moreover, in terms of rights to family, there are no clear rights for either spouse in same-sex and transgender heterosexual partnerships regarding walay rights regarding for same-sex couples, wala sila clear nga rights in relation to hospital and prison visitations. So if ever na ay hospital sa ilaha no sa same-sex couple sila na ay hospital dili kay klaro kung pwede sila makabisita sa hospital, kung pwede sila makaatiman, kung masakit ilahang partner. Wala po'y klaro nga rights in relation to prison visitations, making medical and burial decisions, transfer to joint properties, custody of children, insurance benefits, other privileges accorded to married and unmarried opposite-sex couples. Now, recommendations in relation to rights to family provide mechanisms to protect the rights of same-sex spouses to enter into legal partnerships. Second, remove homosexuality as basis for legal separation. So, ihawa na ka ng homosexuality as basis for legal separation. And the courts and judges be advised to grant custodial rulings on fair assessment of parental abilities. The DSWD should rewrite rules to equalize adoption rights for same-sex couples. Dapat kay i-equalize na siya. Muna importante kayo niyang mga ang LGBT nga party list class kay para ma-push kini siya nga mga balaod sa Congress no. And something can actually change in our country in relation to adoption rights. Lastly, restructure the benefit system to accommodate same-sex partnerships in the SSS, GSIS, and in PhilHealth. Okay, so some media recommendations. I would recommend you all, class, to watch this series in Netflix called Pose. Grabe, kini siya ka nice na series. No? It shows the lives of transgender women in the 1980s. And themes on AIDS, on same-sex relationships, on sisterhood are here. And again, American Horror Story as well, season 6, I think, sa cult, kaya makita lang ninyo yung dynamics sa same-sex na couple at na bata. And Glee as well, same dynamics. So, as for discussion questions in our synchronous class, I'm going to ask you the following questions, class 9. I would like you to answer the following questions so that we can discuss these. Do you think you are open to discovering a side of you that might be gay? No? Why not, no? What if naagi gamay nga parts sa mo nga interested nga explore na nga parts sa imong self or okay naman sad kung dili. Pero kanang are you open towards discovering that part of you? If you are already bisexual or transgender, that's fine. I don't think this question applies to you. Second, what is your opinion of violence against the LGBT community, particularly on European colonial violence towards Native American tribal people? Would you ever be violent to a gay person, or do you believe you would respect someone who is gay? I know nga dili siguro mo amin ang mga tao nga naagi homophobic tendencies ani nga klase. I know nga I'm not being sexist nga lalaki ra ang homophobic. Napoy babae nga homophobic, no? Especially sa mga religious kaayo. So, ang kabalo ko dili gid mo amin nga mao na inyong panglantaw pero I want you to give an honest answer lang, no. Would you ever be violent to a gay person? Have you ever done that? Dili ta mo i-report ko inyo na istorya pero gusto ko makabalo sa tinuod lang, no. May kung isulat ninyo din na class nga, yes ma'am, I hate gay people, pero honest answer siya, kaya nang basahon ko lang na at least makasabot ko nga mo na imong panglantaw niya kaning. This will be graded, of course, but it will not be graded according to your answer. Your answer will be graded, of course, according to your answer, but according to honesty. So as long as authentic in answer mo na siya in a point. And how am I going to know if it's authentic? I just sometimes know lang. So sa ko mabasa, makabalor ako. Do you believe you would respect someone who is gay as well? Or if you yourself are a member of the LGBT community, what is your message for people who are homophobic? So yes, Cass, that would be all for today, and that was a very fruitful discussion on queer theory. Thank you, and as mentioned, I'll see you in class. Bye, Cass.